Mount Salina. Reading this resolution, I've got issues with the way it's worded. It says to execute addendum number 2. That means to add to. So now you're changing the agreement you have. And it says the next part of it's the display in a public right-of-way. So public will displays there in this display? And will there be restrictions on what you can or cannot add? We're getting into constitutional issues.
It's an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce, who administers the program, so it's not an open-ended, any member of the public can display that art, and so there is a jury to art process and a selection process. So it's not an open forum for anyone that wishes to place a piece of art. It's part of the Chamber's program.
That's my question, because the way that's worded, that's my concern. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the public on this item, or this commission on this item? Bring it back up here for action.
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve resolution number 18-7634, authorizing the mayor to execute addendum number 2 to the license agreement for sculpture display in the public right-of-way with the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. We'll move on to development business. We're ready for 8.1.
Multitasking.
No problem.
Item 8.1, resolution number 18-7626, authorizing the mayor to execute a license agreement with Overland Property Group.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. If we can get the projector running, we'll have some graphics to go with this. But the subject of this license agreement is the Lee Mercantile buildings that are located at the southeast corner of Santa Fe Avenue and Elm Street. And there are 2 primary 5-story buildings there, and those buildings extend out to the right-of-way line on Santa Fe, Elm Street, and the 5th Street sides of the building. This building complex was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in June of 2008. As the Commission is aware, the Overland Property Group, working with Flint Hills Holdings Group and Salinas Chodo, has a contract to purchase the Mercantile buildings with plans to convert the buildings into loft apartments with a mixture of office and commercial space in the ground floor storefronts. In Phase 1, which is the north building, there's a plan to create 53 rental units, with 33% of those being rented at market rates and the remainder being income qualified. There is a large combination of low and moderate income tax credits, historic tax credits, a Kansas home grant, some enhanced property tax rebate, also trying to take advantage of the opportunity zone legislation. And so for that reason, the ownership group has not completed its purchase of the development. LLC is still the current owner of the property. But the project is moving forward, and Jones Gillum Renz has prepared and submitted preliminary plans for this renovation project in support of the application, requesting approval of a conditional use permit. And in addition to that, a number of the improvements proposed are in the abutting right-of-way for Santa Fe and Elm Street. And Jones Gillum has been working closely with the Public Works Department to coordinate with the streetscape project. The Planning Commission approved a conditional use permit to allow conversion of these buildings to residential apartment units, with up to 106 apartment units in the 2 buildings. One of their conditions of approval was that approval of a license agreement by the City Commission shall be required for any private improvements, including recessed parking stalls proposed to be placed in the Santa Fe or Elm Street right-of-way. And so the application that's before you today is seeking approval of a license agreement that would authorize the placement of a number of private improvements in the North Santa Fe and Elm Street right-of-way. And in your packet, I've tried to circle those with a red pin, but this at the north end would be, at the top would be the Elm Street improvements. And so up in this area, there's a proposal to put angled parking stalls and parallel stalls. And then also along the north face, there's 3 entrances proposed, and those would have a set of stairs that would come out. And those improvements would all encroach into the public right-of-way. And so the license agreement is the method that the City of Salina has used when there are private investments or improvements that would be privately owned and maintained, placed in the public right-of-way. And so what is unusual and why the Planning Commission could not approve the plan for having reserved spaces along the Elm Street frontage is that is in the public right-of-way, so that's within the City Commission's jurisdiction. The other thing is that the developers would like to reserve those spaces for use of residents of the Lee Lofts, and so that is best addressed through a license agreement. And so the primary items that this is addressing is steps that extend out into the Santa Fe right-of-way that they wish to modify and maintain, and 3 new sets of stairs to come out from the ground floor to the street level on the Elm Street side, as well as the parking spaces that they would like to reserve for their private use. And so the license agreement prepared by staff, the developers would be responsible for painting and maintaining stripes for the parking stalls, removing snow, posting signage, and they would be responsible for monitoring compliance of those restrictions. And so one thing we wanted to point out, and it's not easy to see, but up at the corner of Santa Fe and Elm, the curbs are being brought out so that that would make it easier for pedestrians to cross in both directions, and with the movement of that curb line out to the north, that does create enough space where you can fit 30-degree angled spaces into that area without vehicles extending out into the travel lanes on Elm Street. So I think that we have just a view of what that looks like. Currently, there's a grassy strip that has an abandoned rail line in it. All of that would come out and be converted to sidewalk, to recessed parking, and to an elevated set of stairs that would come out in 3 locations on the north side of the building. So we have referred this to all public and franchise utilities. No one identified any conflicts or objected to Overland Property Group's proposed use of the right-of-way. The developers will be responsible for construction, sign installation, and monitoring compliance and any costs associated with maintaining those as private use spaces. So we've identified 3 alternatives for you. One would be to approve the agreement, authorize the mayor to execute that. I would qualify that by stating that it is the entity that you're agreeing with is blank in the draft agreement, because at this time it's not exactly clear. There will be an entity formed to take ownership and development of this, and we're not sure exactly what the final name will be, so that has been left blank, but it is a variation of the Overland Property Group. You could postpone consideration of this request, or you could decline to approve the proposed agreement and provide further direction to the applicant and staff. We do have Jeff Gillum here, who's been actively involved in the design, and so either he or I would be available for any questions you have about the project.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Any questions for Mr. Andrews?
So right now, we're at the point, if you're asking us to approve a license agreement and not knowing knowing that Lee Development LLC owns it, but it's going to be sold. So, you said you were going to leave that blank. Is it transferable?
We actually wanted to address how, or suggest how you might address that in terms of your action, and so I'm going to ask Mr. Bankston to speak to that.
Along that same line, Commissioner, our suggestion would be if you wish to go forward today, and I might interject, Mr. Andrew can probably explain in more detail than I can, or Mr. Gillum, that I think we do have somewhat of a chicken and egg situation here in terms of trying to keep things moving and progressing toward the ultimate goal. And it's simply a matter, as I understand, of there being ultimately a determination of the entity that will hold title and conduct the redevelopment project. And it's just a matter that has not been identified and who it is would be signing on their behalf. So if you wish to go forward so that the developer would know that conceptually this meets the City Commission's approval, I would suggest that the resolution instead, rather than referring to a specific party or licensee, this would just be for the resolution today, that it would refer to the ultimate owner/developer of the Lee Building redevelopment project. I'll look to Mr. Gillum to see if that would be appropriate. That would leave that document blank until we know the precise name of that entity and who would be signing on their behalf. If the Commission wishes, we could do so in anticipation of ratifying that at a later date once that name is actually known. But I think we can proceed if you'd rather, or if you're comfortable with conceptually approving the license agreement, knowing that the ultimate owner developer's entity name will be included when the time comes. And as you probably noted, it is not effective until that closing occurs. We could simply do it that way. I think whichever way you prefer.
If I may address the commissioners, I'm Jeff Gillum with Jones Gillum Rents, representing Overland Property Group and Flint Hills Holding. Overland Property Group and Flint Hills Holding are the developers. It really comes down to the semantics of having that legal name, working through the state historical, or getting federal grants, home grants, some of those others. So they just haven't come up with the actual legal name entity, as Greg says. So we know who's developing it. We're pushing forward. We're really excited about the project, but at this time, legally, they haven't defined the property development name.
How about Gillum Plaza?
Is there a timeline when they think that they're going to have that property transfer or purchase completed and/or a name? Is that like in the next month, or?
As Greg and I think Dean said, it's a very complicated closing that occurs because there's so many entities involved. I can tell you the timeline that we're anticipating is submitting for permit here within the next month. They hope to start construction no later than February, so they cannot start construction until everything's closed, and that means the tax credits all come in at the same time. The purchase of the property occurs at the exact same time. They get historical tax credits at the same time. So it's truly like purchasing a house. All that comes together at one time. And that right now we're looking at, February, March at the absolute latest time frame, because they would like to start construction in February.
So this resolution will be recorded, Greg, at the Register of Deeds?
Well, the license agreement.
The license
would
agreement,
be when it's ultimately executed.
Would it make sense to put on there, and I don't know if this will be a sign, would it work better to put Overland Property Group LLC and or its assignees or something? Could they assign that license agreement to someone? Would that make more sense?
They can. with the consent of the city. So
I mean, I don't know. It's just,
it's
Then it'd
almost,
be back to us again for
assume-
another pass.
yeah.
It
I
would
assume you
require-
might all wish to actually, that it be with the purchasing party, but
Yeah, I'd actually prefer, as Greg suggested, if you could approve the resolution with the idea that the name, the legal entity, will be filled in at time of closing, would be a lot better. Like I say,
I
right
didn't know
now,
if that would be easier. That's what I was asking. I didn't know which.
Mr. Bengtson, you'd mentioned, or maybe it was Mr. Scragg, something about conceptually approving it and then coming back when we actually had the name and ratifying that?
that was another approach I think you could consider.
Would that extend the flexibility to them I mean, I like to maximize their
Well, it makes
speed
it,
and
it makes
flexibility
it
they
a
can have.
two-step process where they're coming back to you. If it helps at all, the improvements that are allowed in the right-of-way are specified, and we have the ability to rescind the license agreement. So if the improvements don't get installed at all, or in compliance with the agreement, or the project doesn't play itself out like anticipated, you still have the ability to, revoke the license agreement somewhere out there in the future. So, I understand the concern about not knowing the entity, but if the project just doesn't play itself out either by entity, by closing, by construction of the improvements, or by ultimate build out of the project, you still retain the upper hand in terms of the license agreement. If that helps reassure you at all.
In terms of the timing and why this is brought at this time is that we've been working with Jones Gillum Rins on their building permit submittal plans, and it's important as part of that to know whether those spaces on Elm Street are available and whether they can count on those as being reserved for their residents, and it's a part of our plan review. So we recognize that we didn't have all those things finalized, but this was, whether you want to call it conceptual or to see if there was support on the commission for turning those spaces over to the exclusive use of the Lee Buildings project.
Is that at the request of the city that those be assigned to the Lee Building?
No, is at the request of the developers. The
And
issue
Dean,
that
if I may
is-
interrupt, Dean,
Okay.
I think that's been embellished more than really where it was. I think it was a request of the developer if they could sign that. We know we can't police it. We know it's going to be on the public right-of-way. We know anybody can come up and park. But I think they just wanted the idea of having a sign for the Lee Building, as it will be. They're going to be spending a lot of money on ash, and it's purely their development. We've met with city staff. We're going to try and match the streetscape as it goes around the north side. So with that, they thought, if we're developing and putting that much money to improve that whole street, it'd be nice if we could sign some of those parking stalls. That's not absolute. Our biggest thing is making the building accessible, because as you all know, there's a loading dock on that side with the rail, and so we've got to have access on that north side. That's really the primary thing that we need the license agreement for.
And we didn't touch on it, but your design includes an ADA ramp and
Yes.
the switchback that's necessary to make that elevation change. And that does need to be in the right-of-way, just practically from the space that's available.
Further discussion? Thank you very much. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address this item? There being none, we'll bring it back up here for discussion or action.
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve resolution number 18-7626, authorizing the mayor to execute a license agreement with the developer of the Lee Hardware Lofts project to be designated later.
Second.
We'll look over at Mr. Bingston and
Yes,
ask him if
that works well. Thank you.
satisfactory. Yeah. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item will pass 5-0. 8.2.
Item 8.2, request to authorize staff preparation of special assessment engineering feasibility report for Phase 1 of Magnolia Hills Estates Edition Number 2.
Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is the second application that has come before you under the revised and updated special assessment policy that was adopted in May of this year. And in July of this year, the applicants or petitioners, Magnolia Hills Inc., submitted a scaled-down application for a final plat of the next phase of Magnolia Hills Estates. And that scaled-down version proposed to plat only the west 19.40 acres of their 48-acre tract at this time. And so we've highlighted for you on page 1 of the report just the distinctions between what was submitted on a preliminary basis and what was submitted for their final plat. And so instead of 48 acres, it's 19 acres. There's 45 lots instead of 105. There's no street connection to Holmes Road in this development phase. And as a result of the change, their detention pond is outside the boundary of the plat. The Planning Commission met on September 4th and approved the final plat for this property, subject to a number of conditions. The City Commission authorized the mayor to sign the plat and accept the offered easement and right-of-way dedications. And the property is now zoned R1 single-family residential. There has been a petition filed by Magnolia Hills Inc., which is Kelly Dunn and Stan Byquist, and they're requesting the use of special assessment financing to finance the installation of public improvements needed to serve Phase 1 of this addition, and that Phase 1 contains 29 building lots in the northwest corner of the subdivision and would include the extension of Ridge Hill Drive and Stone Post Lane. Those streets would form a loop, so there wouldn't be any need for any temporary turnarounds. In your update to the special assessment policy resolution, you created a two-step process, and this is the first step. And in this step, it requires that the developer and staff provide you with certain information to assist you in reviewing the application for the use of special assessments. If you were to act favorably on this request, then the next step would be for the city engineer to prepare a more detailed preliminary engineering estimate and feasibility report for your consideration. So the request this evening is that you authorize the use of special assessments to finance the construction of improvements needed to serve those 29 lots in Phase 1. And as part of that, to assist you in your review, the policy has review factors spelled out. And what we've done in our report, starting on page 4, is to go over those review factors that are in your policy. And the first item deals with life cycle maintenance costs relating to street improvements and utility improvements. And so you have a table there on page 5 where Public Works Department has spelled out what they see as their life cycle costs for the improvements needed to serve Phase 1 as it relates to all the aspects of the streets. The second table submitted by the Utilities Department shows the estimated life cycle costs over a 50-year period for the utility extensions to serve this subdivision. As far as whether this project requires or anticipates additional expenditures for public improvements or involves third parties, what we've noted is the developer has agreed to reimburse the city for their share of 1/2 the total cost of constructing an 8-foot hike bike path along the east side of Markley Road. The city would pay the remaining portion. So in lieu of a standard sidewalk here, which would be their obligation, the plan would be to construct a hike bike path along the east side of Markley Road, and the developers would pay 50% of the cost of that improvement. The projected market price of the developable lots, in other words, if you or I went to the developers and asked to buy a lot to build a house on, they're anticipating a $25,000 to $35,000 price per lot. And the anticipated sales price of homes in the area would be $195,000 to $275,000 price range. Based on current data, there are 39 existing homes on the market in Salina within that price range. As to the projected rate at which the houses within the subdivision will be purchased, we would ask the developers to provide that information based on their experience of the absorption rate in Magnolia Hills Estates Edition. That had 95 lots, and they would be in the best position to tell you the rate at which those lots were absorbed. We're not looking at any innovative housing products. This is all single-family residential housing. And as we look at the projected special assessments, we would note that there is a detention pond that would be constructed, but the cost of that would be spread over other property to the east. And there's a sewer line extension needed to serve this that would also benefit future property to the east. So we're projecting specials in the $32,000 to $33,000 range per lot. And you compare that to the anticipated lot price, the specials would be anywhere from 95 to 130% of the projected cost of the lots. You had asked us to provide you with a 5-year average of assessments, and one of the things we noted at previous meetings is if we look at the past 5 years' experience, we had River Trail, which where only 75% of the cost was assessed as special assessments, and Grand Prairie where only 80%. And then we also had Pheasant Ridge, where probably about 15% or 20% of the total costs were actually assessed. And when you roll those into a 5-year average, that $19,000 number is really not really representative of the typical specials if you were looking at 100% assessments. So if you look to the most recent benefit district, the commission approved, those assessments were $34,000 a lot, and we're talking about $32,000 to $33,000 here. This property would not be subject to multiple benefit districts. Staff has reviewed all the lots, and we don't see any difficulties or topographical barriers that would prevent any of the 29 lots from being built upon. And as we look at connectivity, there will be connectivity back to the west to Markley Road. In the future, eventually Stone Post Lane will extend back to the east over to Holmes Road. There will be a street, Mustang Lane, that will extend to the north up into the Wheatland Valley addition, which is directly to the north. So there will be multiple ingress and egress points into and out of this subdivision. Markley Road is Collector Street, but as you know, it's a rural design currently, and there are improvements that are needed to improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, and for that reason staff is proposing the 8-foot hike bike path along the east side of Markley Road. So as to the debt or financial management considerations, the estimated cost of the bonds that would be issued for this phase 1 would be about $1.4 million, which the finance department indicates does not significantly burden the city's legal debt margin. So again, there is no minimum capital contribution from the developers. They must put up 20% of the cost either in cash or submit a letter of credit for 35% of the estimated project cost. And they also have to indicate that they don't have any delinquent specials or delinquent taxes in any of their other developments. So staff has identified the following options this evening. You could authorize staff to prepare an engineering feasibility report and resolution of advisability for Phase 1 for your future consideration. You could postpone consideration of this item and provide additional direction to staff or the applicant as to information you'd like to receive, or you can vote to instruct staff not to proceed with preparation of an engineering feasibility report at this time. You do have in your packets, this is the overall preliminary plat layout for the full 48 acres. The area identified as Phase 1 and Phase 2 there is the portion that they have final platted, and the area that's highlighted in color there is the 29 lots that they're proposing to develop as part of their Phase 1. So with that, staff would be open to any questions that you have about our report, and we do have the developers here as well if you have questions of them.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Questions for Mr. Andrews?
I just have one. Is just clear, it's proposed that this phase would not be part of the future benefit district if one has to be formed for Holmes Road development? Or are these houses going to be part?
The way that this was arrived at in terms of the boundaries was based on the advice of the city's bond council as we looked at different options for financing Holmes Road. We determined that this area here, if we had in fact created a benefit district for Markley Road, which there was not one created in 2005, these lots would have been in the Markley Road benefit area, not the Holmes Road benefit area. So these properties will not be subject to or part of any benefit district that might be created for Holmes Road.
Dean, could you go to the aerial map, please, of the, I think it had both Markley and Holmes on it. So on the far left or west edge is Markley Road, and the far right is Holmes. And so if you snap a north-south line at the midpoint, this phase is on the west side or the Markley side of that midpoint line. So that was the logic on the part of bond council that the benefiting, this particular phase 1 and 2 benefit from Markley rather than Holmes.
Okay.
The other thing you can't see as well on this drawing is that the boundary of this subdivision of this final plat lines up with the east boundary of the Wheatland Valley addition to the north, and that Wheatland Valley addition is in the Markley Road benefit area. So there will be an alignment basically from north to south, where everything to the west will be attributable to Markley Road and everything to the east of that line will be attributable to Holmes Road.
Thank you.
At what point will the sidewalk go in? Is that at the beginning of the development, or?
We would
ongoing?
anticipate it would be done simultaneously with the construction of improvements in Phase 1, but we have Mr. Stack and Mr. Kowach here, and Mr. Stack may want to articulate that a little further, but our anticipation is it would be done simultaneously with the development of Phase 1.
And if it's funded with special assessment, it need to be part of that special assessment contract.
Yeah, we have, see out there today, we've been working on this for a few years, trying to get a trail from that subdivision to the park, basically. So it's just a real missing link we've had for a long time. We've had it surveyed and designed, and actually have our, every year we have $50,000 of CIP funding for trail improvements, and we've historically done either levee trails or trails to connect parks and whatever we need to do connections. And this is one that's finally up on the list. So we've actually designed it, we've staked it. So if you look out there today, you'll see some flags, and there's some staking out there. Our guys, our city staff, is planning to start the grading for it, and there's got to be a retaining wall and some storm. It's a bigger job than normal, but it's one we're excited about tackling. With the development of Wheatland Valley to the north, as well as this subdivision, we knew it was timely. And so anything we do will help install a sidewalk. So the idea is we're going to get it ready to install a sidewalk at whatever time that is. Our plans are mostly to put in a, kind of the normal limestone trail, but the timing of this gives us the option, hopefully, if this project kicks off next year, that we can also assess the sidewalk as well. So that would be the time to do it. So it's more of definitely a partnership, and one that I just wanted to give you an update on.
Where does that trail start and where does it end?
It's going to start at, is it Stone Post, Dean? Is that the north one?
Yes.
Right now, we were just planning to connect Stone Post to Markley, because that's kind of the north entrance, or Markley, along Markley to the park. So we had not planned to go to Magnolia yet. This action today actually would extend it all the way down to the southern boundary, which
next to the detention basin.
Yeah, about right at the detention pond. So then that gives us the opportunity to go south a little farther, as well as then we'd probably just try to connect it to the corner at Magnolia, because it's a detention pond there. There's no reason not to keep it going. So with our $50,000 a year, I can see some of the funds being used out here over the next couple of years to try and get something at least to the corner of Magnolia and Markley, and then hopefully to the west someday to back to the city across the bridge. But that bridge to the west of here on Magnolia is a deal breaker, because it's really narrow. So we just haven't gotten there yet. But every year you put a sidewalk in, Jason used to say, and Mike, he built a sidewalk to nowhere. Eventually it's going to connect somewhere. So that's the idea.
Would the sidewalk on Magnolia be on the south side?
South or the north? That's a good question. We have, to the west, on the south side is the soccer field, and then we do have a hike and bike trail, a wide one on the south side of Magnolia. So we would assume that's what we'd probably end up with here as well at some point.
Thank you.
When the sidewalk gets to East Crawford, it just sort of disperses into that
to the park
big area, just kind of right where you want.
Yeah, there's that road. Markley has really wide shoulders, and so you'll see a lot of people walking and riding their bikes in that area. Or you can go over towards the runway, towards Dean Evans, and walk in that area. So you kind of got a lot of options, but at least it gets you. Markley's narrow and fast, and it'd be nice to. Our trail is going to be separated quite a ways from the road, which we're pretty excited about. It's not going to be right next to the road. It's going to be separated on the east side of the ditch, and then kind of meander along the edge there as till we get up to the park, and then we can get right next to the baseball diamond that's there. So we're excited about the project, and this just is more of a partnership. Whatever money that is donated or is assessed, since they don't assessed for this project, will just help us pave it or put in a sidewalk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would the applicant like to address us?
I'm Stan Byquist, 2601 South Ohio. Thank you for taking the time, and the city staff for preparing this. And we would hope that you would approve this. It's an extension of what we've been doing since 2006. We've got the streets in, all the sewer connections, and this first phase and then the second phase, they launch us to the east. The sewer line we have to put in at this time. The detention pond we have to put into this time for the whole for the entire acres, and that is driving up the specials cost on the first phase. We know that. Now, we've already projected the cost for the second phase, and they dropped dramatically. But you have to start somewhere, and that's what we're doing. We hope to hit. We're trying to hit a target market of the housing prices, and the realistic low is going to be right at the $200,000 range, and we hope to try and keep the majority of the houses under the $250,000 range. But we can't totally control it, because we can't control every individual and what their needs and wants are. But that is our goal, and we see the market, and we want to hit that market. We wish, historically, we've used up our lots in each phase in right at 3 years, about 10 lots a year. We would actually hope in this phase that we could go a little faster. But there again, we have to see what the market brings us. With that, I'll try and answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Bikles? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your consideration.
Is there anyone from the public that'd like to address this application? Bring it back up here for action. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. Hello.
Brian Frazier, 512 South 8th. I just had a couple questions. The developer would have to pay 100% for the sidewalk, correct? If they were developing and putting a sidewalk in? I'm just asking the question because I'm not sure.
If we weren't doing a joint hike-bike path and we just put in a conventional sidewalk, the developer would pay 100% of the cost of that sidewalk.
Of the sidewalk.
But that sidewalk width would be?
But it would be about a 4 to 5 foot. Right. And so we're proposing to partner with them to widen that and turn it into a hike-bike path.
I mean, I understand that. And so they would normally have to put in a 4-foot sidewalk, which is the typical sidewalk in 90% of the neighborhoods in Salina, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If they have to pay 100% for their sidewalk, why don't they put in 100% for the bike trail? And my other question is, with all the developments that we have going on in Salina, how many lots are there that are still open to be built upon to where we can actually not have to go to assessments and help fund another development here in Salina that will have empty lots in it? My third thing is, anyone that has any connection with realtors or anything like that, I think they should recuse themselves from voting on this. My only things. Thank you.
One question I had is they are putting sidewalks in the neighborhoods, correct?
There would be sidewalks, internal sidewalks on the public streets in the subdivision. What we're referring to is because we have taken a position that this subdivision is within the benefit area for Markley Road, then the sidewalk that needs to be constructed would be on Markley Road. And so in our special assessment policy, whether it's a water line or a street, the city's generally policy has been that the developer pays for the basic requirement, and if there's any oversizing that is done, that is paid for by the city at large. So that is why we were taking the approach that they're responsible for a 4-foot sidewalk. The city would be responsible for the oversizing to turn it into a hike-bike path.
And sort of build on that just a little bit, this approach is consistent with how all the other wide hike-bike paths you see in the community have been funded. They're either a cost-sharing approach or they're 100% city expense, where we've identified the location of a hike-bike path joining an existing subdivision. So this approach is consistent with our past practice.
Following up on one of Mr. Frazier's questions, and first of all, I'd like to thank staff from all the departments for getting this infrastructure information to us, because I think it helps us make a lot more informed decision. But following up on Mr. Frazier's question, do we have any information on the number of buildable lots that are available in the community?
Looking more behind me.
I'm just looking in that general direction.
It has fallen below. If you're looking at vacant lots that have paved streets and services, it has fallen below 100 lots, unless you want to look at the, if you take all vacant property, and if you count two vacant lots on West Iron or some scattered lots in the center of the city, if we're just looking at the areas that would be considered our new residential areas, the number of lots that have water, sewer, and services that are available is less than 100.
Okay. So I think, I mean, obviously, each of us up here comes to this from our own perspective, but I think where I'm coming from on this is, I'm looking at, we have about 40 homes in this $200,000 to $275,000 price range available for purchase today. We're committing ourselves to about $60,000 a year in annual maintenance obligations. And we've got maybe around 100 lots that are buildable today. So to me, I mean, this just doesn't make any sense, especially because I would think that of those 40 homes that are available now in that price range, I feel like we're incentivizing people to move further and further out, and we're going to be devaluing, you know, other homes in our areas and just contributing to decline in those particular neighborhoods. So I just wanted to be able to take the opportunity and thank you, Mayor, for letting me articulate why I can't support this at this time.
I have a quick question. How did you calculate the 60,000 a year annual obligation?
I added, and let's see, I added the 484.
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on page number 5. The 484, I think that these were costed out to like 30-year. The 484, and then on the next page, Martha created a very incredible formula here. I took the 15,000 and the 21,000 for the water and the sewer, added those together then to the 484, and divided that out. Actually, oh, here's what I did. I divided the 484 by 30.
Which is 16,000.
Right. And then I had the 21, basically 21.5, which was the sewer, and the 15, which is the water, which, I'm sorry, brings us to 52.5.
Yeah.
And over the cost of the project, about 1.575, of the 30-year life cycle.
And I think, as Dean mentioned, this is our second project that we process this way. I think staff needs to do a better job for you of doing that math and getting it down to an annual cost, because a couple of questions that I have are, and Dan and I spoke about this a little bit, but he and I haven't had an opportunity to compare notes, but in terms of some of the, in that 484,000 number, the 228,000, is that initial construction or is that reconstruction only? I mean, can you provide some, shed some light on the annual cost?
Yeah. Yeah, we, Martha had a nice table there, so it's just pretty easy to follow. So we tried that. We weren't quite as successful to make it quite that easy. So we just kept coming up with extra things that 13 items ended up being, probably should consider these things. So in our first Pheasant Ridge number 2, I think that was, or was it number 3? Was that the one we just did a month ago approximately? We put a number in here. This is kind of how we calculated it. We had these items and we had some maintenance costs for them. So to be fair and try to show what we're doing and see if we need to revise it, we included this table. So to answer Mike's question, the initial cost of the infrastructure is $1.4 million approximately for everything. So these annual maintenance costs for asphalt pavement, for example, which is the biggest one here, is microsurfacing, mill inlay, crack seal, all the stuff that we do to the pave patching over a 30-year lifespan. And we feel like that we have, over the last few years, we've kind of talked to you about our cycle and how often we should be on pavement management of our roads. We're doing that. So that's how that came into play. How many square yards of pavement are there going to be? So we can always just, for whatever subdivision we get, which we've got 3 or 4 more in the pipeline that are going to be coming to you with this exact thing, how many square yards of pavement is it? and then the cost that we have is a $31 cost. We adjusted that for a 2% inflation, basically, over 30 years, and voila, we came up with the number. So that's our basic math, and I'm sure Mike and anyone else that critiques this could
what's
easily...
your calculation annually for maintenance?
Annually? I guess it's 30, I mean, she's right. I mean, I would think that the 484 divided by 30 is what I would say, because we tried to make every one of these 30-year
So in
estimates.
20 years, a subdivision's going to roll itself over and have $1.2 million cost when it cost $1.2 million to build it originally in streets and sewer. I've lived in a subdivision 20 years, and they've cracked sealed once and done an overlay once, and that's a long ways from $1.2 million.
Where did you get the 1.2 million?
Wasn't that the cost?
$60,000 a year.
Isn't
Times
that your
20
cost?
years.
Is that what it is if you do 50,000 a year times
Well,
30
60
years?
times 20 years is $1.2 million.
Well, actually 52.5, I rounded up.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I'm not sure how Martha gets her numbers, but
Yeah,
the idea is the
that's-
asphalt pavement is what we're doing. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, that
We
number
didn't
makes
crack
no
seal any
sense.
roads until,
Yeah, that number has no basis.
it doesn't have any basis?
I mean, you can't, I mean, there's no way we spend $1.2 million on this subdivision in 20 years.
Well, and I share the concern.
mean-
On the street side of things, the other big ticket item is mowing of the detention basin, and I don't know that that number is inaccurate, but that's been a policy that we've talked about for quite some time, that the developer, and it's a formal policy of ours, that the developer can make an upfront payment, and then we'll take on maintenance responsibility. So that's a pretty significant item. With
Yes.
respect to water and sewer, that's where the assumption that there's $50,000 a year of maintenance expense in water and sewer is the bulk of that issue. And I haven't, like I say, I haven't had a chance to talk with Martha, but given what's being installed in the way of PVC, water, and sewer, I don't anticipate we're going to have $36,000 a year of maintenance expense. I think we're misinterpreting that number somehow.
do
Well,
too.
there's one other number then on number 5, the street lighting. I'm trying to work
Yes.
the numbers. Should that be 2,400? It looks like there's an extra.
Well, it's $11.35 a month for each street light, basically.
So that's per month.
Times 12.
Okay.
Yeah, we should have had per
Okay.
month in there. We don't have it in there, but it's per month.
Alrighty.
So that math actually, I believe, works. I checked that today to make sure. That was a significant number as
So
well.
70 a month. So that's
Yeah,
eight-
that one, I mean, you
$840
could go to
a
the
year.
bank
Okay.
with that. That's what Westar charges us. If you
Okay,
put a
I-
light up, that's what it's going to cost.
Yeah, I didn't realize the per month. Okay, I thought it was for the year.
I mean, those
Okay.
asphalt pavement numbers are totally dependent on what the commission wants us to do with the road. So that we can come back to you with exactly what we think we're doing, and that can go up or down depending on what you guys what the commission wants. But some of these numbers are fairly, they are what they are. We do street sweep, we snow. I mean, those are small. The mowing and maintenance, we have a pretty large mowing contract every year, so we can sure look at that. But it's a fairly sizable number. Luckily, this one does not have a lift station. So Pheasant Ridge actually had a lift station in it, and those are $30,000 every 30 years approximately.
Basically, the maintenance on these roads is the same as every other street in
Well, I mean,
Salina
that's
or every other
Over the
subdivision?
last 6 or 8 years, as you've increased the sales tax and as we've gas tax and just kind of looking at our cycle, that's what we're proposing. Now, is that what we've always done? Heck, no way. That's not what we've done in the city. So should we go back to that, or do we want to keep doing it? It's totally up to you guys, and we try to maintain them the best we can. But yeah, that is maybe not fair to say that's what we've always done. That's for sure.
And if it's helpful, the action item that's before you today is for staff to prepare the cost estimating for your future consideration. So step one, it used to be that just based upon receipt of application, the staff would proceed to review and finalize cost estimates. We've added the step where we come to the city commission first and confirm that you'd like us to do that. Between now and the time we report back, we can provide additional clarity about these numbers, and I really think the the significant difference there is in the water and sewer assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't get,
I know
myself
Martha
wondering-
Martha's, those numbers are sewer plant operations, pumps, wastewater. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you have to consider as
Yeah,
well.
but
Just
what
to
it doesn't
be,
appear to take into account is the sewer and water revenue collected over that time.
yep, okay, so I just know that is not the cost. Those don't include the cost of installing and maintaining water lines only. There's a lot more in that. And the annual water expense is there.
I find myself wondering, and it's important to know the costs, but why did we don't study the revenue side as well as the expense side? I mean, there are taxes, there's property taxes, there's sales taxes, just in the building of these homes and the furnishing of them. I don't understand why we don't detail both sides.
And we can do that.
do we collect water and sewer, those fees go to help build up to replace water and sewer when they need to be replaced,
Sure. In
correct?
fact, we're doing $4 million a year of replacement, but our focus is on much older, I mean, 70, 80, 100, 110-year-old
Well,
lines.
and the water and sewer we're putting in now are a higher quality than what we put in 50, 60
Right.
years ago.
So,
too.
yeah, I don't think these numbers represent any of the actual cost. Well, they may be incorporated in the overall annual expense, but I don't think this is isolating costs that we anticipate in terms of replacement and repair of water and sewer mains in the development. I think it's taking our annualized water expense and sewer expense and distributing it across the entire system without recognition of the revenue that's generated. But I would need to confirm that. I'm speculating.
But I think it does serve to remind us all that we don't just put in infrastructure and it starts perpetually maintaining itself. And, in terms of streets, Mike, I mean, I think we've lived in our house, 25, 30 years, and I'm not sure that our street's gotten much attention in that time, and I'm not meaning to bag on staff in any way whatsoever. I'm just saying that when our demands so outstrip the resources that we have to address the needs, I mean, they've got to prioritize, the most highly trafficked streets that are in the worst repair. And I guess we can discuss whether or not we could shave some money off that, but I think it does come down to the fact that there is a real cost for maintaining infrastructure.
Any other questions for Mr. Stack? Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Eckhoff, 2664 Highland. I was just wondering, I guess, if this is preparing, more exact cost estimates, if we could get the cost broken out for a sidewalk and then cost broken out for hike, bike, trail, what the specific cost to the developer would be either way, and then what the cost to the city would be with the hike, bike, trail.
Is that question? Come on, because I'm not going to expect an answer to my question, Dave. But for the 100 vacant lots, have we ever characterized those as a group? As an example, are they listed for sale? Are they buildable? Can we roll them into a land bank? Are these just residential lots you're referring to?
The lots I'm referring to don't. We did an inventory. If you could take lots all over town, isolated lots in 100-year-old neighborhoods, that number that I gave you does not include those vacant lots. It includes lots that are in our new residential growth areas that have services. So, for example, in the last 3 years, the City Commission has approved special assessment financing that created 72 buildable lots in River Trail, Grand Prairie, and Pheasant Ridge number 3. And some of those lots, a good number of them in River Trail have already been built on, so they're no longer available. But it's not referring to every vacant residential lot in the city. I'm just talking about the ones in our residential growth areas.
With that, I have one question. You just stated that in the last 3 years, there were how many?
There were, in the last 3 years, special assessment financing has been approved for 42 lots in River Trail, 14 lots in Grand Prairie, and 16 lots were just approved for Pheasant Ridge number 3, for a total of 72 lots that have just had special assessment financing approved in the last 3 years.
In the last 3 years, you've approved assessments for 73 lots, and we have a little under 100 lots that are still empty in these newly developed neighborhoods. Why do we need more?
A couple things. Each of those are a different, distinct neighborhood. So
Exactly. I understand that they're all in distinctly different neighborhoods, but they're all in these new developments that have just popped up in the last 5, 7 years or whatever. I totally understand that. But you've just approved assessments for 73, said, in the last 3 years. We still have 100 empty, and you're getting ready to think about approving assessments for another how many?
Well, I assume the 73 are part of the 100.
Well, I know, that's what I'm saying. So
And-
that means they're still empty.
I think
Not necessarily those lots, those particular lots are still empty, but they're part of that almost 100 lots that are empty. So you haven't filled 73 lots in 3 years. Why are we going to build some more? And the other part of my statement or question or whatever is, I understand we want to have bike trails and all those types of things, which is great. You know, I think they're a big necessity. But why don't we go back to the older neighborhoods that still have the 100-year-old sewers, the 100-year-old water services, the 100-year-old gas services or 70-something-year-old gas services, and update those? You guys just had to spend how much money on Santa Fe because we put in the field house and we put it in a hotel and all this, and the sewer system we had couldn't handle it. All the updates that we did downtown, which is great, but that tells you that there's so much infrastructure within the city that needs to be taken care of now. So that's my only thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Anyone else from the public like to address this?
Well, I would like to put our developers on the spot if I could. And of those 72 or the 100 lots, now, are you referring to 100 lots that are buildable right now?
I'm referring to in this general price range that they're trying to reach. The city has an inventory of about 100 buildable lots that have water, sewer, and streets that you could pull a building permit
Do you have a
on.
breakdown of what subdivision those are with how many lots?
I do, but I don't have it with me. I try to keep it updated every month as we issue permits, but of the 42 lots that we granted specials for in River Trail, we've issued about 14 permits for those 42 lots. So they're not 42 vacant available lots because 14 of them have been built on since that special assessment financing was approved.
So we have how many that are vacant without a permit to build a house on? I mean, that are truly available.
If you're looking citywide, it is over 200 vacant lots.
Well, I mean, from a development standpoint, I'm not going to count the individual lot that's here. I mean, that from an economic perspective is not going to be an attractive site
So rather
for
than individual
development.
lots, you're referring to platted subdivisions
Right, well,
that have
because
yet to build out.
geographically, those areas you mentioned are relatively close to the area we're considering now. And what I was going to ask the developers is, you know, the Magnolia Hills may be closing out of lots, but do you all have access to those other 72 lots that are being considered? Because one of the criteria we're supposed to use is inventory of lots. And if there is an inventory, you know, the development itself, you know, it meets my criteria for infill. I mean, I have in my mind a certain intersection, which for me is a foregone conclusion we're going to develop out to. But on the other hand, if we have lots, similar lots that are available, in fact, a lot of them, then just want to know about our need to float the money at this point.
Kelly Dunn, Salina, Kansas. I'll try to answer the question best you can with subdivisions that are probably in the $300,000 range and under. We did do River Trail we opened it up last year. We've sold over 30% of our lots already in less than a year, and it's going really well. Magnolia Hills is always, for 12 years we've had it, it's always done an average of 12 lots per year. So we're actually out of houses there right now. We have some under construction, but there's always a need for a new house out there. The other area is Stone Lake. I think there's 3 lots that are off the lake that are for sale, and there's 3 lots that are on the lake that are for sale, and then there's no more lots out there until they develop some more. There's really nowhere else, I don't think, other than the one that Todd just got qualified for, and there's nothing left out there, 16. I don't think. So
you're implying to me that there aren't 60 vacant lots then?
Not in that 325 and under range. Now, if we go up to the little bit higher range, there's more lots available. And if there is, I don't know where they're at.
Okay. Well,
yes, but because the lots are available doesn't mean they're accessible to these builders or developers. There are some vacant lots in Cedar Ridge Addition, which is on the south side of Cedar Ridge Drive, but only Bob Hayworth can build houses in that subdivision, so those lots, while vacant and with services, aren't available to other builders or developers. There's a number of vacant lots in River Run, but those homes in River Run many of them are in the $450,000 to $600,000 price range, so they're not comparable. What I was trying to do was identify the number of lots available for new construction in this market price point.
Well, you just said
so how many do we actually have? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's...
How many do we actually have in this price range then? I mean, that are...
Well, we haven't been tracking that that long. What I can tell you, if we just look back 3 years in the subdivisions that have been approved, there were some additional phases in Quail Meadows Estates, which is at Schilling and South Ohio, and every single one of those lots is built on.
So 0 there.
Magnolia Hills Estates Addition, which is on Markley Road, there were 95 lots there. Every single lot is built on and spoken for, so there are no more
We do have 2 left.
lots there. We had the Ryan Addition was approved at the southeast corner of Ohio and Schilling Road, but the City Commission declined to approve special assessment financing for that subdivision, so it's got platted lots, but they do not have any city services, right. So they're not available for construction, and the majority in the lots, even not in the subdivision as a whole, but in the portion of Stone Lake Addition out on the south side or east side of South Ohio, the number of lots there that have water, sewer, and streets is less than 10 at this point.
So are we talking a usable 100 or a very functional 30? I'm just, because be honest with you, that's the only factor that's.
So in River Trail number 2, you had 42 minus 14. So you have
42 minus 14.
28 lots left.
And we have 28 lots left, and all the houses that we have out there are either under construction, or they are sold and people are living in them. There's, nothing sitting out there that's for sale. So there's a market right there in that area that's been really good.
Empty or used?
That's empty.
So
that
can
be built on. 28 that can be built on yet.
And we put a little bit more in than what, usually a developer wants to do, maybe 20 to 30 for a 3-year period. We went a little bit more there because we expected it to go pretty fast over there.
Pheasant Ridge number 3, which we just approved for Todd, was 16.
16 buildable lot. I mean, obviously they're not available yet because the improvements are not
but let's consider them to be.
Yes, the 16 lots that financing has been approved for. There were 14 lots in Grand Prairie Addition that financing was approved for, and River Trail Second Edition, or the north phase of River Trail, had 42 lots in it, and there been somewhere between a fourth and a third of those we've actually issued permits for.
So I come up with closer to 50 lots in that price range if those are the because Grand Prairie
my
would be
100
higher.
number included places like River Run, which has $500,000 homes, and Cedar Ridge Addition, where only Bob Hayworth is the exclusive developer. So those lots aren't available to consumers at this price point.
And there's some at Grand Prairie too.
Grand Prairie too, which are higher.
That's more 350, 400 and up there too. There's not very many for this price range right now.
Stone Lake, you said 3 or 6. The ones on the lake,
the
ones on the lake are not going to.
You got to kind of consider them higher end because they're the lots are $80,000 to $100,000 on the lake, and the ones that are off the lake are around 30 to 35, which are comparable to what we're talking about. And there's 3 of those left. If there might be 2, maybe 3.
And just for the commission's information, there are 2 more of these that are on staff's review that will be coming forward in December, because the perception in the development community is that there is a need for developable residential lots. It's not staff. We're not creating. Most developers don't, in my experience, move forward with development in Salina unless they perceive a need.
And I agree with you, and if you use the free market argument that's brought to us, if that's the case, then the market will pay for it. I'm not opposed to the idea of using the special assessments, but one of the criteria we came up with was there had to be a need. We don't want to have a glut of lots that we've extended money financing for that the experience has shown over the last 2 or 3 years we're not using. That's the reason I wanted to find out whether that 100 was really 100, or in this case, looks like 47, 48.
What I have done since 1990, I have provided a report always to the Planning Commission, in some cases to the City Commission on an annual basis, and the average inventory in Salina, Kansas since 1990 is that we maintain about 200 to 215 buildable, developable lots that have services in them. That is the running inventory that we have averaged, and we have stayed pretty well in balance with that over the years, and now we are well below that 200 lot number. And so in my experience of reviewing residential subdivision plats for 25 years, the city of Salina will sometimes go 2, sometimes 3 years with no new residential subdivisions. And then as all the lots get absorbed and developers recognize that they have run out of lots, then we get a wave of new residential subdivisions. So that is what has occurred in the past couple of years, as we've had Magnolia Hills Estates number 2. We have Wheatland Valley with Dan Daly that's come forward. We had Todd Welsh with his next phase, and the reason that's occurring is that there's a perception among those builders and developers that they have run out of lots to build on.
And just to clarify the market economics of specials a little bit, they are a city bond issuance, but the developer is responsible for the special assessments on the property from day one until the home is built and sold. And so they incur an expense, if not a risk, if they overstate the market. And as they pay those specials down, they're not able to pass those through in terms of the sale price of the lot. So that's an expense that they're incurring without getting recouped. The only time the city has a financial expenditure associated with special assessments is if there is a true default, and I think that's happened once 30 years ago.
The last default we had was in 1988.
And so I think in terms of the configuration of lots, our assessment of specials to lots that actually are developable and will sell versus lots that are basically amount to drainage, and some of those considerations put us in a better situation with respect to defaults. But just so we're clear, I mean, the developer is at financial risk if they overstate the market and get too far ahead of what their development might build out.
And I would understand we have to have, obviously, more lots available than we think we're going to need in the next couple of years, because as slow as your process takes to build.
And I really think that we've been real responsible with the use of specials over the 12 years that we've had Magnolia Hills, and we've been proportionate and very respective of the market because we are responsible for the specials. Any other questions?
Mr. Andrew, I would
Thanks
ask
for letting me
that,
put you on the spot.
would ask
Thank
that
you
you
very
maybe
much.
give us a list of subdivisions if somebody could at some point with the number of lots that are available.
I have a running total from the first day I started work here. It's 33, and I don't have it completely memorized, but what I can tell you is that since I started work with the city of Salina, we have issued more residential building permits than we have created lots. So we are not, and I don't remember the exact proportion, but I have it upstairs, but we have created something on the order of 1,300 lots, and we have issued over 1,400 residential building permits. So at least from the day that I started work with the city, we have consumed more lots than we have created through the subdivision process.
Is there other discussion, commissioners? Would somebody like to make a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion request to authorize staff preparation of special assessment engineering feasibility report for Phase 1 of Magnolia Hills Estates Edition Number 2.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
The measure will pass 4-1. Thank you very much. Is there other business?
Mayor, I do have one item, if I could touch on it with you. Due to the timing, the Chamber of Commerce is working on their 2018 legislative policies, and we met, I believe, Thursday or Friday of last week, and they indicated they'd like to get it compiled by next week. So I distributed to you, as part of my interim city manager update, red lines of that policy, and each entity, school district, airport authority, Chamber of Commerce, kind of have a role to play in terms of suggesting policy language. All that I've proposed is picking up where we left off in past years with a couple of exceptions, clarifying internet sales tax in light of the recent Supreme Court decision that authorizes states to collect internet sales tax, some clarification of language as related to the property tax lid. I think the thing that's probably the most two things that are probably the most noteworthy is previously as a policy we have indicated support for exemptions on sales tax on food, and I'm not suggesting that we change that policy, but that could be a significant financial impact for the city and the state if that were to be enacted. So continued that stated support, and noted that internet sales tax may be a way to offset that if the state considered an exemption on food sales. And then lastly, a new development recently is what's called dark store theory. And big box retailers, as they transition out of one location to another and leave behind a location, a lot of times will have deed restrictions on who may occupy that subsequent store, and then try to make the argument that the property taxes on that should be very minimal on the basis of resale and occupancy. And there's already a method by way you look at cost and replacement value and income value. And in other states, they've been successful in kind of making an argument to get their assessed values significantly lowered to then lower their property taxes. So recently there's been a case, I believe in Riley County, where it went to the Board of Appeals and the property tax and the appraisal were upheld, but the League of Kansas Municipalities has language, and I kind of parroted that language in our policy statement, wanting to rely on the continued use of our current appraisal practices and not dark store theory.
So by contract, the use of the property is limited, and that affects the valuation.
Yeah,
I mean, and the whole
part of the
world of
argument
valuations,
is no one
they
else
come
will
by
buy it for the use
contract.
that we used it for because of its size and because of the restrictions, and therefore it just doesn't have as much market value, and the appraised value should be lowered.
And that was the issue with where Save-A-Lot is now, wasn't it, when Dillon's left?
The Save-A-Lot, well, I don't know if there was a deed restriction there or not, but
There was some. If I recollect, I thought there was, and I may be incorrect, but I thought there was basically restricted against another grocery store moving in there for a while.
well, and I can't say with certainty, but this is more so the big box retailers that have a large footprint, and then they don't necessarily leave the community. They may relocate and improve and then leave behind that former footprint. So in the past, we've done it both ways. You've formally acted on our statement of legislative policies, or the city manager has prepared them and submitted them. So I want to at least make you aware of it. If you had questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. If you wanted to act on them, you certainly could do that more formally if you like. And I did bring copies if you would like another copy.
You want us to agree on a, I mean, I can tell you my opinion is you know, tax on food ought to go away, but tax on the internet sales definitely ought to take its place and probably generate more money.
I think you have to have one for the other, probably. My concern about doing away with the tax on food, just it's kind of like what they did with corporate tax. You go from here to zero, then we have a shortage at the state level when it comes to education and everything. So, yeah, if you can offset it with internet sales tax, yes, or even if you do away with sales tax on food, you'd want to somehow phase it in over a period of time. That gives entities like the city of Salina a chance to try to figure a way to offset that loss of income tax.
Sorry.
We couldn't cope with the loss. I get it that the bundle of revenues that have been developed over a period of time, it needs to be closely looked at to be balanced out again. You can't just pull. It's like that little game where all the blocks are stacked up. You can't just pull one thing out and have all the blocks tumble.
It seems like a few have already been pulled out over the years, and this will be a big one.
But I thought philosophically, you did a good job of stating it philosophically, acknowledging that food taxes, we'd prefer not to do them, but absent them, we need to be able, through some other means to recoup that. So, I mean, I thought you did a really good job of recognizing that reducing or eliminating a tax on food, no matter how much we want to do it, does have an impact on our budget, and we need to be able to make up for it in other ways. So, and thanks that was a good catch on the dark stores too. That was, if we need to, formally approve this or whatever, ratify it to send it on to the chamber.
It could go either way. If it's acceptable to you, I can incorporate some phasing language as it relates to the food sales tax exemption if they choose to take that course, and I'd be happy to submit it as it's been drafted with that one amendment if that is your consensus.
I'm fine with that.
Yep.
Nope. No, the floor's closed. We're in other businesses or any other
Mr. Mayor, I
business?
just wanted to bring up, I want to thank the staff. I want to thank Martha Tasker and HDR for their presentation the other night on the river project. A lot of enthusiasm, and a lot of people really are excited about this project. So I want to thank for their work they put into this. Martha put a lot of work in on it, and it's appreciative.
I agree, and I'll be sure to pass that along.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.